this is Faith at Faith and Books, and I've decided to do a Tuesday tag that is inspired by the season of Lent, and also the fact that we seem to have a more modern version of the bubonic plague, and that's making me think of history and permanent things and that sort of thing. So I thought I would do a list of my well, for me it's 12. For this tag, it can be any number you want. If it's just one book, if it's 3 books, 5 books, 10 books, whatever. But it's my top 12 religious novels that really spoke to my soul. So, and you can be, you know, I'm Catholic, but whatever, you know, if you're a Christian denomination or if you're Jewish or Buddhist or whatever you might be, what are the novels? This is just, well, I have one play in there, so it's got to be, I'm not including nonfiction like biographies or theological works or anything, but what are the books, the religious books, the religiously themed books that have had the most impact on you on a spiritual level? That's the tag, and you can list whatever number of books it happens to be. So let me get started because I have 12, which is a little excessive. I actually had to pare it down, but let me start with the first one. The first one is The Lord of the World by Robert Hugh Benson. He was, I believe he was a English priest. He wrote this book, I think in 1907 or something. Oh yeah, there we go. This is Pope Francis's favorite book, and I first heard about it when Pope Francis first became Pope. He mentioned it, and I had heard the name because I have a friend who really loves this author, but he's kind of obscure. Anyway, I read it. I've read it now 3 times, and which is weird for me because this is a dystopian sci-fi book. What's interesting about it is that it was written in 1907 and it said 100 years in the future. And he just, it's just a brilliant book. The way he foresees the future is so off the wall, it's so off the mark, and yet it's got this uncanny accuracy at the same time. So the way he describes transportation, sort of the rise of sort of cult leaders like Hitler and Lenin and stuff, it's sort of predicted here. Anyway, it's about the end of the world. And it's the Masons figure prominently here as a very evil group, which I don't really know much about the Masons. And it's really, really interesting book. He's an incredible writer, very enjoyable. I highly recommend it, and Pope Francis approves. So here you go. That's the first one, Lord of the World by Robert Hugh Benson. And I'm not doing these in any particular order. I'm just listing them. This one is a middle grade book by Elizabeth George Speare. I read this out loud a couple times to my kids over the years. It's really moving. It's a very well-crafted novel, very powerful. So to me, even though it can be enjoyed by middle school kids, it's, you know, adults can enjoy it too. It's very well written. It's a very moving story about a young boy who has had a rough life, and he's joined the Zealots. It's during the time of Christ, during the Roman occupation, and it's about what happens to him when he encounters Christ. Very powerful, very moving. In fact, I might reread this. It's middle grade March, right? And I haven't read it for a while. I think it's due for a reread, so I might read that this month. So that's the Bronze Bow by Elizabeth George Speare. Let's see. This is just a treasure. Mark Twain's Joan of Arc. This book, when I first found out about it and then read it, I saw it in a local Catholic bookstore, and I thought, what? Mark Twain wrote about Joan of Arc? That's so bizarre. So I had to get it. So I read it, and then after I had read it, a couple of months later, I happened to turn on the TV, and the PBS station had a kind of an hour-long documentary on Mark Twain, and I kept waiting for them to mention this book, and they never did. They never mentioned this book. If you go to Shmoop, you know, Schmoop, and you look up it, they completely ignore that he wrote this book. That's why we don't know about it, because I don't know, the powers that be decided that they're going to just, I don't know, ghost this book of Mark Twain's. But he actually said it was the book he was the most proud of, I think. I think that's what he said. And he went to France and he actually researched the trial records of Joan of Arc. This, it's a typical Twain book, and then it has the comical characters that are sort of part of Twain's repertoire. The knights that fight with her, we get a lot of personalities that create a lot of humor. But the portrayal of Joan is just exquisite. The way he portrays her otherworldliness and her holiness and her innocence and her power and her courage, it's amazing. It's very well done. I've read this book a couple of times, and I just can't recommend it highly enough. So Mark Twain's Joan of Arc, excellent book. Let's see. Another really amazing book by someone you wouldn't think would be writing about such a topic is The Song of Bernadette by Franz Werfel. So Franz Werfel was a Jewish Austrian, I think he was, writer. And he was friends with people like Thomas Mann and Kafka. He was in with all those literary circles. He married the widow of Gustav Mahler, Alma Mahler, who was also a composer in her own right. But he got out, he's outspoken against the Nazis. And when they did the Anschluss, where Hitler took over Austria, he got out and he went to live in France for a while. And then, of course, France was taken over. So they were trying to smuggle him out, to get him out. And he had to wait at Lourdes for 5 weeks before the people who were supposed to get him out could get to him and smuggle him to America, where he wound up living in Los Angeles. And while those 5 weeks, while he was in Lourdes, he was exploring the whole place. And he made a vow to himself that if he got out, he would write about Bernadette and the miracle at Lourdes. And so he did. So it's a Jewish guy writing this book. And it's so powerful. It's so profound and beautiful. The way he tells the story is with such intelligence and respect. And it's absolutely spellbinding. I just think it's such an excellent work. They made it into a movie with Jennifer Jones. The movie's actually pretty good. I usually don't like saint movies. They're too saccharine and too kind of didactic. But that one's actually well done, and it's pretty close to the book. But the book just has a lot of depth to it. So I highly, highly recommend this book, The Song of Bernadette by Franz Werfel. Let's see, what do I have next? The next book I don't have a copy of. I got it out of the library a while ago. It's Quo Vadis by Henry, and I don't know how to say his last name. It's a Polish name, Sienkiewicz. It's Sienkiewicz. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1905. So this book is set in Nero's Rome. And it's about this Roman, I can't remember what his, status. Was he a legionnaire or a centurion or something like that? He's sort of, maneuvering his way up in the Roman government. And he falls in love with this beautiful woman who turns out to be Christian. And the novel is just brilliant. You feel like you're in that day and time. You're totally immersed in it. And the author just conveys the Roman mindset and worldview really, really well. And you can't understand how he's going to get together with this Christian woman. It's a complicated story. It's just so well told. And it's so amazing how the author just really builds up the chasm that's between this guy who's in love with this girl. He really just sort of wants to own her or have power over her. and how his love sort of subtly changes him, but then there's just a wall. He's never going to convert. He's never going to believe. And then he does, and it's believable, and it's really cathartic. It's very powerful. That it's a really, really well told story. And another thing I really like about it is he manages to convey the creepiness and the depravity of Nero's Rome, and the ruling class, but he never gets explicit, but you feel it. You know, your skin creeps when you're reading about what it was like there. So anyway, Quo Vadis, a really, really good book. Another one I don't have a copy of, and I'm very sad about this because I had a copy and I think I must have given it away or something. This is also a middle grade book. It's called Sun Slower, Sun Faster by Meriol Trevor. Meriol Trevor was a British writer, I think in the 40s and 50s, who was very prolific at the time, but now no one's ever seemed to have heard of her. But this book, Sun Slower, Sun Faster, I read out loud to my kids, and it was really, really interesting. It's a British history. It starts during World War II. You know, like every other story, these kids are sent to their uncle or grandfather's house or something during the bombing, and they find a priest hole. And when you go into the priest hole, you travel back in time. But they don't go all the way back in time and then travel forward in time again. They go back to a certain thing, a certain time period, and try to understand what's going on there. And then they'll go back to the previous one that led up to that one. And it goes all the way back to when Christianity first came to Britain. So it's really, and in the meantime, in the current time of World War II, I think it was during World War II. I haven't read this one in a while. I've really got to get this one so I can, I just want to own it and I want to be able to read it again. But there's a mystery going on in the current time of the book too. So it's really, really interesting, a really neat view of sort of Catholic history and British history in general. Very well told. Really, really like that one. I really want to get it again. The next one is The Song of the Scaffold, and I own this, and I cannot find it. I've been searching and searching, but that's by a German writer, Gertrude von Furt, I think is how you say her name. She was also a popular writer in the 40s and 50s. And this book, The Song of the Scaffold, actually became the basis for an opera by Poulenc, the Dialogues of the Carmelites. And I think he wrote it in, when did he write that opera? 53, something like that. Anyway, it's the story of the last nuns to be guillotined during the Reign of Terror. And maybe they're the very last people to be guillotined. But they guillotine these Carmelite nuns who, you know, take vows of poverty and all they do is pray all day. They must have been very dangerous to the state. And it's just a story of this one particular nun and how she came to be in the convent and how they viewed what was happening to them during the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. It's a very slim book. It's almost like a novella. Very moving, just beautifully written. Really, really beautiful. So The Song of the Scaffold would be another book that really had a lot of spiritual impact. Then, let's see. The next one is Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot. I've read this a couple times with my high schoolers. This is just a beautiful play by T.S. Eliot explaining or about the murder of Thomas à Becket by Henry II. Or, well, he says he didn't do it, but some knights of his went and murdered Thomas à Becket. And it's a really, really moving play. It's very reminiscent of sort of like the old Greek tragedies. It has a chorus in it that's sort of moving the narrative along, and you just have a couple of main actors coming out. And there's sort of allegorical characters come and speak out to Thomas à Becket, and Thomas à Becket is sort of grappling with his own sins and trying to do the right thing. And what's interesting about it is once the murder takes place, then it becomes like a comedy. It's so weird. It's so it's really effective, the contrast between the very high, formal, beautiful poetry, and then suddenly it's a couple of buffoons, the knights that murdered him, are joking around. It's like something, like Shakespeare at his coarsest. So anyway, T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral, a really, really brilliant and very moving play. Let's see. Oh, I don't have the next one, Brideshead Revisited. You sort of have to say that one. I haven't read it for ages, but I read it many times in my 20s. And I loved the BBC adaptation with Jeremy Irons. I kind of had a crush on Jeremy Irons. But it's a beautiful story of sort of people being jaded by the world and betrayed by the world, and always having that restlessness, that spiritual restlessness. And towards the end, when Julia, I think they're sitting on a bench somewhere in a garden or something, or in a park, and Julia is telling Charles why she has to go away. And that whole conversation is just Catholicism, encapsulated in that whole, it's almost like a monologue where she just sort of opens her heart and tells him everything she's been thinking. And that is such a brilliant passage in that book. It's just that passage is worth reading. But the whole book is wonderful. Evelyn Waugh was a weird guy. He was not the nicest person, but he definitely got, he got the principles. He understood things on a really deep level. So Brideshead Revisited. The next one, number 10, would be The Power and the Glory by Greene. Where is that? I got that. Oh, here it is. This is a really old copy that I picked up used years ago. This is another one I read and reread in my 20s, and I haven't read in a long time. So I've read a lot of Graham Greene, so they kind of are blending. So I think this is about this priest who, I think they call him the whiskey priest or something. He's an alcoholic. He's not a good priest at all. He's fathered an illegitimate child. He's kind of a mess. He's a ruin. But it's at the time when, in the 20s, when the government took over and they were really anti-Catholic, and they started shooting priests and arresting people and forbidding, there was no freedom of religion or anything. And he winds up in that time of terror and oppression. Everything gets stripped away, and he finds out what's true, and he finds out that what really is the most important thing to him, and much to his own surprise, because he's pretty down on himself. He knows he's a failure. It's very, very moving, very, really, really tragic and moving and poignant. So The Power and the Glory by Graham Greene. And then, let's see, the last two, okay, I have one, but I didn't actually read this, but the Brothers Karamazov, I listened to it on audio, and I was just commenting, Brian at Bookish said that he tried to listen to the LibriVox recording of the Brothers Karamazov, and that he just couldn't do it. And that's how I did finally. I kept trying to read this, and I could never get, what's the part, the Grand Inquisitor. I would get to that, and I just couldn't move. That's what happens to me with these long books. If there's something that breaks the narrative, I feel like I'm barely grasping the narrative as it is with these complex novels. And then when you get to something that breaks the narrative, I just can't ever get traction again. So I wind up just stalling out. So that's what happened with this book. And I kept trying to read it, and I kept failing. So I finally listened to it on LibriVox. And oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did. It's so incredibly powerful. In fact, I think I have to reread it or re-listened to it because it was so powerful that I just walked around in sort of a fog for a few days. And I don't know if I ever properly processed it. I kept wishing that I had read it in a class with a really good professor that it could explain everything to me. That's what I think I need to do to really process it well. But I just know that it's incredibly moving and insightful and powerful. So the Brothers Karamazov, it's really a powerful book that I want to reread and get to know even better. And the last book I don't have a copy of, and I'm going to get one as soon as this year of reading one's own is over. I'm going to get myself a copy of this, but it's Loras by Eugene. I'm not going to say the name right. It's Russian. Vodolazkin. Vodolazkin. I'll list these below. And that came out just a few years ago, and it kind of pays homage, I think, to the Brothers Karamazov. I think it's written very much in the same style. But it's about this young boy who is being apprenticed to this sort of mystical monk who is, what do you call it? He knows all about he's like an herbalist. And the monk dies and the young man falls in love. And he makes some very bad choices and he has to live with the consequences. And it goes all through his life. He has like this really tragic life where it just goes through these different stages. And at the end, the resolution at the end is so incredible. I never saw it coming until it happened, and then I realized that it had to be that way. It's just a really, really beautiful, profound novel. Highly, highly recommend it. And I'm gonna reread that one too. A lot of these books I want to reread because they were just so powerful and there was so much to process. There was so much profundity in what they were saying that they're worth many rereads. You can just glean more and more from them. So anyway, I'll put that list below. I'm sorry this is long again, but if you would like to be tagged, consider yourself tagged. And like I said, you can do any number of books, and you can be of any religious faith, but just the books that had the most impact on you on a spiritual level. So take care, stay healthy, bye.